Welcome to the Arts to Hearts podcast, a show for artists, creators, creative entrepreneurs to have heartfelt conversations about living a creative life and a career. As you go into this show, hear your favorite creators talk about money, mindset, business, creativity, and everything else that goes behind into making a life that we all adore as an artist. Hear the messy and the wonderful side of being a creative. I am your host, Charuka Arora, an artist, creator, and founder of Arts to Hearts project. Thank you for joining me here. Take a comfy seat and be ready to take a peek inside hearts of your favorite creatives. Let's jump right in. Before we dig into this episode, I quickly want to remind you about our first open call of 2022. Yes, after a wonderful year of creating so many opportunities for our community, we are back with a bang in 2022 with our first international open call. The theme for this open call is Treasured Moments, and we are so excited to be collaborating with Photo to Way magazine and the founders of Photo to Way magazine, Juliana and Twiggy, for this open call. The open call ends on 7th of February 2022, and you can find all the details to submit, the link to submit, in the description box below, or you can go to www.artstoheartsproject.com/submit. Hey you guys, welcome back to the Arts to Hearts podcast, and this is season 2. I can't believe that we're already here in season 2, and I'm so excited to share my guest for today. Today, I have the famous Pennylane on the podcast. Pennylane is an artist consultant, she's an educator, she's a lot of things. More than anything, she's someone that has really put forward a lot of support system for artists. I have been a fan of Pennylane's work, and I've heard so much about her from so many of our community. I am so thrilled to have her here on the podcast today, but I really don't want to take up too much of time, and I want to really invite Pennylane here. Welcome to the podcast, Pennylane.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Okay, before we get into the podcast, would you like to? I don't think I had a fair introduction, but I just wanted to hear from you and people who are listening to the podcast. Would you introduce yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Pennylane Shen, and I run a business called Dazed and Confucius. And we consult with artists worldwide, as well as deliver seminars and services about becoming a full-time artist or taking your art practice to the next level. I myself work with about 600 artists one-on-one each year.
Wow.
Through consultations every day, and I also travel to deliver these seminars about professional practices and development in your arts career. And we've been doing this for quite a while now. I started the business in 2006, and we've grown since then to have a number of other consultants and writing services and website development, things like that along the way.
Perfect. That sounds amazing. I know so many of my own friends who've worked with you and who've only said good things and nothing else. But let's go back a little back in time. Let's talk about where were you born, and how did you get into the arts in the first place?
Yeah, so I was raised here in Canada, where I live now, and I grew up in a great household in Canada, but I didn't necessarily have a large exposure to the art world. I am a visible minority. I come from Asian heritage, and that just wasn't in the cards for somebody like myself, and growing up in the household that I was in. However, it was always sort of on the side for me, and something I was really interested in, and something I was really, frankly, good at as a child. Creating and making. I've always been really drawn to the making of things. And then when I entered university, I pursued two things simultaneously. One of them was English literature, and the other one was fine art. So luckily, I was
Wow.
able to go to a school that allowed me to do both and pursue. It was two schools actually, two universities that you went to at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And one of them, yeah, one of them was for the academia, and the other one was for the art. So you commuted between the two. Um, and in my final years, I took a course called Visual Culture Theory that was just being introduced to my university at that time. And I was so captivated and drawn by it that eventually I went and pursued my master's degree in it. And it was basically it is the study of how images make meaning.
Okay.
And I was fascinated by that, and basically the power of art more than necessarily the making of art itself for myself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I stopped making the artwork and started to talk
Yeah.
about the artwork.
Yeah.
And that led to years and years in the gallery industry, basically talking
Yeah.
about art, writing about it, selling it, of course, and working with artists. And the part that I found I enjoyed the most was the working with artists part. So a number of years ago, I quit my job in the gallery world and
Yeah.
continued my own business in the advising world. So
Yeah.
that's where we are today.
That is so wonderful. And you've said quite a few like very important things that a lot of us experience in our creative paths. Especially, I feel like the first one, um, demarcating and understanding the difference between do we want to be a part of the process of making art, or the process of
Mhm.
either consuming art in another way, or like
Mhm.
talking about art, because a lot of times people enjoy art and they feel like they want to be an artist, or a lot of times, like, I think I see this amidst a lot of artists and people involved in the arts. How did you realize that? I think because this is a very fundamental question, especially when you're getting into an industry and you feel like this is something that, like, that feels like your calling. How were you able to recognize the fact that, okay, I I like arts, but I'm not in the making process, but I'm instead in the post process.
Yeah, I think that's, tough to say because it happened quite organically. And, when you leave art school, for me, I needed to get a job, and it
Yeah,
made sense to get a job in a gallery. And
yeah,
of course, then the next job you get is also in a gallery because you already have the experience. And then the next
yeah.
job is also in a gallery because you have
You have
even
the
more
experience.
experience. That's right. So then I just climbed that like basically the ladder of getting to the
Yeah,
higher and higher end galleries. So it kind of one sort of begets the next. That's how it
yeah,
organically happened. However, when I was in the BFA, the art school part, making of the artwork, there was something about like the critiques with other artists, like the group critiques with my fellow peers, that I just really, really enjoyed. And perhaps now, in hindsight, looking back, more so than the making, as I
making.
said, like more so in the making of the artwork. And I do really think it takes two different kinds of people. I know that there are a lot of folks out there who are consultants that are also artists, and then there's those who are artists that are also consultants.
Exactly.
But I feel like the reason I'm able to speak to the artwork is truly because I am not a
Not.
working full-time artist myself. Yes, and
Yeah,
I do think that if I was, um, it would affect my
yeah,
subjectivity towards artwork, and
yeah,
also, of course, it would affect my ability to and time that I dedicated to the gallery industry, which
yeah,
it itself is a full-time job.
yeah.
It's Yeah, as any artist knows, it's difficult to balance two full-time things, and for me,
100%.
it wasn't possible. So I would not have been able to accumulate the experience that I have in the gallery industry if I did pursue a life as a full-time artist. It definitely gives me
That's true.
insight, and there's I think there are benefits to that other side,
Yeah,
and I'm so grateful to have had that experience getting my BFA.
yeah,
It certainly taught me a lot about just the use of materials that I wouldn't
yeah,
have gotten otherwise,
yeah,
and the ability to have a full time studio practice. So that was useful, and I'm really happy for that. But I do think that it's not possible to be an artist consultant and have a full-time art practice.
Yeah, that's true. And I think what's really good about this situation is that once I feel, at least I can speak as an artist myself and also have experienced the other end of it. I feel like,
Mhm.
firstly, as an artist, what we lag a lot of times is relatability, because it's easy for people to say, but it's very hard for people to understand what it really feels like to be an artist unless and until you've truly experienced it. And I feel like what's really great in this combination of that you have is that even though you're not a practicing artist anymore, you know what it feels like, Mark, because you've been there. That you've known, you know that I don't think anyone who's not, who can ever understand what it means to be immersed in the studio
Mhm.
unless they've been immersed in the studio, because
Mhm.
it's an experience in itself. And I think people also have like really weird perceptions, and I don't know, maybe it's just because I come from India and the background, and it's a very unusual job even in India. A lot of people think like how they need to do you know hard work or like labor or like stuff like that just to get through their day, and artist gets to spend like just like hours in the studio. You're listening to the music and like whatever people feel like there's a glossy picture, but they don't know what goes in the studio, and then what happens on the unpredictability of being an artist, the um, you know the how volatile a career this could be. And I think someone who's been a part of it truly can understand the fears and the worries and what really matters more to artists, and then can see it from a third perspective and not be emotionally involved in that process, because you are not as you're not a shareholder in that process. You are a third
Mhm.
party who will always see
Mhm.
something from a neutral point of view than an emotional point of view.
That's it. Absolutely.
Okay. So what did you think otherwise what did you want to become if not this?
If not an artist consultant,
I mean, this I'm
um,
sure you would have not thought. I mean, this is something life brought you to, but I mean, this is too, and even for today, someone like it's a very niche industry, and um, consultation niche down also. So I'm sure this
yes,
hasn't been on the cards. Like it just happened to you. Am I right?
yeah, like sort of. It was that many folks came into the gallery that I was at and would try to get in, and they would do kind of all the wrong things. And kind of shoot themselves in the foot. And I saw this time and time again at each gallery I was at. And, and then folks would ask the same questions again and again. And so I thought, this is more than well over a decade ago now,
Yeah.
maybe closer to two, actually.
Wow.
But it was, I said, like, okay, why don't we just have one? I'm going to have one session that says all these things, all these things. It was just made up of the constant kind of blunders that artists were coming in and doing, and what might be more useful, right?
Yeah.
So I held this one, and it was like immediately sold out. It was packed. It was full on, and then it just really showed. And I didn't do really anything. This was before
Yeah.
social media as well. I
That's
didn't
like
really
another
do it.
world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so people just showed up, and that's when it told me that there was a real need
Yeah.
for this type of information. Still, though, not for a long, long time
100%.
did I actually pursue it. Yeah, like so,
Oh
there was a
wow.
need for it. Yeah, I ran the annual twice a year seminars where I just again it was called Navigating the Art Industry, and
Okay.
then eventually a college here asked me to teach it as a class, as a 12-week class.
Oh
So I
wow.
did that. Yeah, I did that for many years while I was still at the gallery. Okay, still doing the gallery, and then I just couldn't let go of the gallery because I felt a lot of fear
Yeah.
around leaving it, even though um, for every reason I should have left it much earlier. But um, I felt a lot of fear around that because, as you said, this was a niche, a very very niche position, being an artist consultant or artist advisor. Um, it was frankly something that I had never seen before.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's true.
so
I think even
yeah.
today it's not a very, especially I feel like the position that especially that you've marked for yourself,
Hmm.
it's very few. Like it's very rare, and
Mm,
you can see a lot of artist coach now appear and like different.
that's right.
But I feel like what you do is like a very professional service of general consultation to like in a corporate format, convert it into a creative format for artists.
Yes. Yeah. So I hope so. But and really, all of it has come from. I do see a lot of similar things now. Of course, it seems very prevalent today, but at that time, it was very niche and
Yeah,
quite risky for me. So it was not something that
absolutely.
yeah, I felt comfortable diving into. So of course, I did it on weekends, and then I did it part time, and pretty much slowly phased out my gallery position
Gallery.
and let the other one kind of take over before eventually taking that leap
Yeah,
and diving right into starting. It's not just becoming an artist consultant; it's also becoming
yeah,
an entrepreneur, right?
a hundred
And becoming a
percent.
yeah, and becoming an entrepreneur itself is
Is
just like scary and comes with a
and I
whole
think it
giant learning curve.
and especially then being I feel like it has so many layers, like being a creative, like being an entrepreneur in a creative industry is one layer, then being in the arts is another layer, and then being for artists, which is like because now I feel the narrative has been stronger that you need to, and I think there's no doubt, I always advocate the fact that we all need to invest in our careers to to go forward. You need to take that effort, and it depends on the ability that you can do at that point. But sometimes I agree that a lot of people cannot invest in times of money, but it can be invested in times of effort, time. But if and when you need to, like any business, like any, all artists are again, they need to know business, and this is a form of business apart from a creative practice, and you need to invest in your business to make sure that it reaps more returns to you. And I think at that point it was even riskier because this notion has been way more popular now that people understand that okay, you do you want to be like a professional artist, this is at least the minimum that you need to do. Maybe have a website, invest in a website, have a better copy, have a better artist statement, have a better, now people understand that they need to invest. But at that point, I think the starving artist narrative also, or maybe I don't know how was that in Canada, but I think the starving artist narrative was so strong that I'm sure it must have been even harder to set, to change that tone and to make like
Absolutely.
to realize artists that they have the potential in their hands and they don't have to keep waiting for more people.
Con- Completely. That's right. Absolutely. So yeah, it was all very new,
Yeah,
basically, right? So for myself and for the audience that I was trying to reach out to. In other words, and you're right, the starving artist kind of narrative is deeply rooted and something that we have to unthink. Um, yeah, and I definitely felt nervous about leaving my job because I thought it was the reason why people were listening to me and why
yeah,
people wanted um, uh, the advice that I was giving or my perspective. I thought it was solely and absolutely based on my association to the gallery.
yeah.
And when I left, I realized that it
That
wasn't
was
at all. No one ever even knew or asked me about that. It was, and I also realized that it had nothing to do with that myself. I was, the things that I feel confident about speaking to a person's practice is because of me. Like that comes from
yeah,
me, and not from my not from a piece of paper,
yeah.
basically.
That's true.
So it took a while to sort of realize that actually, yeah, people
That's
people are interested in me because of Pennylane, not
today.
because of
I think
me.
today you that's a testament because you are based out of Canada, but you work with artists from all over the globe, and I think
Yeah, that's right.
in itself that defines and that explains its own, like how much it's needed and how much it's resonated with people. Because I know I've hardly seen I've been wanting to work with you for so long, and I know that here, even in India, I have. I think again, what we spoke about resonance. I don't think primarily people look at our designations and where we come from. Instead, I think what we look at is if this person can relate to us, and I think that's all that matters at the end.
Absolutely. Well, it's something that I've had to learn firsthand. So,
Yeah,
yeah, fantastic.
lovely. Okay, so what happened when you decided that you okay, you were like, this is what you want to do. You figured that you were interested in working with the artist. You quit your job. How were your early years and your experiences um, in those early years working with artists, especially at Babes
Yeah,
and Confucius?
for sure. I'm trying to think. I guess, you know, I'm trying to think of some early obstacles that we
Yeah.
faced. It was never about necessarily generating an audience. As I said, the need was there, so filling those appointment spots. It was never about that. And knock on wood, I'm very grateful that that was the case and still is the
Yeah.
case. Um, but there was a very small pool of people that I saw, and I saw them in person. And so I would drive to artist studios
Oh,
every day
wow.
and yeah, and do them in
This was
person.
not on social media.
This was not. This was in person. Again,
Yeah.
just in where I lived. So, funny enough, like that kept me busy enough. Like, just seeing people here, and of course, like it grew and grew, and then I started traveling to other cities to do it, and then other countries, and so on. Still always in person, and then. We opened our office here in Vancouver, and then people saw.
Okay.
I stopped going to them, and they came to
Big
me, and
changes.
that was a big adjustment for folks because they really, didn't necessarily like that. Of course, I mean,
Yeah.
everyone would prefer me go to them.
Yeah.
Um, and they were like, well, how could you possibly see the artwork and how can you
Yeah.
talk about it without seeing it? And even though they would have to send in photos of the work or bring a couple pieces in, and still artists today who are really old school like that's a hang up for them.
Yeah.
They prefer that I go to them and see the work. But truly, it was because at that point I had seen thousands and thousands of artwork. Like I understood what acrylic on canvas looked like.
Yeah.
I understood what texture looks like and things like that. So I really didn't necessarily need that strong of a reference point other than photos to be able to understand what was going on. So that was an adjustment to have people come to me, but that allowed me to see a lot more people
Yeah.
than I used to, because I didn't have to travel between them.
Yeah. That.
And of course, Zoom and Skype. Skype was early days that
Yeah.
allowed me to see all our clients around the world.
Yeah.
And it really changed things. But again, people felt strange because they're like, oh, well, you need to see the artwork in person. But
And I
no, I
think,
really don't.
and I think when was this?
When was this?
Yeah.
Oh, between 2006 to 2014, maybe.
Wow. And at that point, because I think in the past, let's say 4 years,
Yeah,
the digital shift has been way high and the shift has been
yeah,
massive, and then the adaptation rate has been so much better. But
that's
before
right.
that, I still remember, like, today almost all artists, like, I wouldn't say all, but yes, majority of artists have websites. I remember when I entered into the arts, which was like a couple of years ago, and I had to redo my website. I used to have a website, and I realized that I had taken like the shape of an artist, and I really needed to revamp and make it look like my current um, designation or whatever. And I figured that I I don't even know, maybe less than 30% people had their websites. And they
Mm,
felt like it was insane that I was putting so much time and effort and money to get a website done. And I was like, I'm sure at that, and today Zoom meetings are common. It's like meeting anyone that you meet like on a regular basis. But at that point, I think people investing into Zoom meetings or Skype meetings is a big, big shift.
Absolutely, absolutely, it is. And even since pandemic, of course, normally before this, I would see people 3 days in the office, 3 to 4 days, and then 2 days via Zoom. And now
Yeah,
it's switched, even though it's still all people that I physically could see in person. It's now majority in
100.
Zoom and only a few in person. So even those who do live here and could come in, they realize it's not necessary, and in
Yeah,
fact sometimes more advantageous because they we're in their studio space and they can kind of even show me around, and there's other benefits to that. So it really has changed the game, like digitally. Yeah, so that was some of the early, like, obstacles about switching from in person to online, and well, even from seeing them in person in the studio to seeing them in
just
person in my office and then online. I also struggled early on with just defining, like, not defining, but rather creative, our creative content, our informational content. Um, there was nothing to keep it from being taken and then recycled and used in another
yeah,
business, and that
absolutely.
that we struggled with quite a bit. Copycats and like
Yeah,
copyright, and just basically, the rise of artist consultation as a field.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and that and just not necessarily having the resources to be able to monitor all of that. So
yeah,
that was a difficulty, but it's something that for the most part we've kind of tried our best to overcome.
yeah. Wow. Um, you've been again, I think in the past 2 years, especially since the pandemic, you've extensively worked with a lot of artists. And I think everyone who's doing this job right now is a job of very high service because um, it's been very hard for everyone. And of course, artists, it's been equally hard. What do you feel, in your experience, have been the top struggles with the pros? Let's say, just I'm sure there's pro and con for both with our situation now. What do you think? How has things affected, like the pandemic affected artists and their work?
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. Like I think maybe the most obvious one has been the inability to show physically in
Yeah,
person. That was a huge sort of struggle at the beginning for a lot of my clients, that many of their shows were canceled, and shows that they had been working towards for a long, long time, that we had been working towards. Um, so that was a huge thing. So public spaces and
yeah,
that kind of gathering around work and the discussion around work, and the ability to pivot onto a virtual platform to have virtual shows, just it was great, and it really did satisfy a need, but it still did not to the point of in person, like not
yeah. It's it's
close.
it's
So
not like this or that. It is this and that. I think
that's
we,
right. That's right. Exactly. So that's why it satisfied to the point that it could satisfy. However, that I think that was sort of the biggest struggle or heartbreak. I do feel we're coming out of that in some ways. Who knows for how long, but I do feel
yeah,
we're coming out of that in some ways. Um, and basically, for those who had the inability to pivot onto a digital platform, and they really felt I think they really sort of felt uh, the lack of connections to their
yeah,
collectors, and the lack of ability to show and therefore market and promote. For those who were able to pivot, I think they felt more benefits than they ever have, in fact,
yes,
and
that's
selling
true.
greater. Um, but there are certain artists, particularly public gallery artists, so ones that are not, um, they don't have a item that they can sell necessarily.
Yeah,
They move from exhibition to exhibition via grants and being invited and being part of collections, museum
yeah,
collections. Those artists have especially felt the struggles of the last
yeah,
couple of years.
yeah, that's true. Mm, how do you feel like when, especially, what do you feel? I know I've heard you talk about this a lot of times, especially with, I think, Daniel. I think Erica, and I thought we would really surface this back again. And I felt like if you had any new inputs and thoughts about what do you think are the major things, especially if anyone, I mean, every artist, any artist who's listening to this episode, um, what are the, let's say, top five things that you feel that hold back artists the most in today's time?
I guess it depends on what you mean by hold back. Like hold them back from what?
Hold them back in their career. I feel like the most important part, it's not the skill. I think skill we all keep developing over time, and where our practice takes us. But I feel like in the part that moving forward, taking that next step. And
Mm,
we're all living in a time where everything is so drastically evolving and changing, and we all
mhm,
need to keep up with these changes to keep moving forward.
mhm,
In that process, a lot of people feel held back because of our own fears or how things used to be, or the shift that keeps happening, and then just keeping up with that shift. Um, and generally, and I think in our creative careers, which in itself is like a it's it's like a big bag of its own. But just in general ways, I feel like a lot of artists feel like they're not able to tap their best potential, be it creatively or being, putting them out there. I think that is the biggest struggle right now, because it is intimidating, if I be honest. It's not that,
mhm.
it is a process, and it's a learning curve on its own. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I suppose I'm happy to speak to like a few, maybe top five. I don't think that the top five, but
Yeah,
five perhaps major tips that I
yeah,
find across the board are perhaps shortcomings in
yeah,
the artist practice, if you like.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, sure, great. First, I guess would be the time. Time is a huge one. Any sort of artists that we meet with, or clients that meet with, that have that don't basically have enough time to pursue their art career, and that is so many of us.
yeah,
Um, because they have either another part-time or full-time job. Of course, they could be a parent or a caretaker of any kind. And they're just pulled in different directions. And your art does demand quite a lot of you
yeah,
emotionally and physically. So without that time, it is very, very difficult to move to that next step. It's near impossible, actually. So I can only help so much with that,
yeah,
and talking about tips for making the most of your time. But truly, without that momentum, it is one step forward, two steps back. So time is the first one. A second one would be research. So many artists don't have enough research in their practice. They don't expose themselves to enough artwork, and even not even artwork, but just different types of fine art, from
yeah,
writing, of course, to music, dance, whatever it may be, but other types of creative fine art. And just knowing in general where their work sits in the larger canon of art theory, um, I feel is a bit of a blind spot for many artists. So
yeah,
exposure and research is the second one. Um, three, I would say. So this one kind of has to do with like work ethic and failure, and so some artists are a little bit too precious with their
yeah,
practice and their work, and there needs to be a level of
boundaries.
disposability in their work.
Yeah,
Yeah, because they need to fail and fail fast, and they need to be able to do studies and understand that some things don't work out, and
well,
it means doing more of those things, and that this is really the long game. We're in it for the long game, and it just results take time
yeah,
and doing something. And that may be the actual technical making of the work, but it can also be the marketing and
yeah,
the promotion of the work. There
yeah,
will be
that's
a
true.
lot of failure. And so there is something about being less precious with the work, but also being a little less precious with the failure, and understanding that that is part of the journey. Fourth, I think there's of course the inner critic piece there that's always very
Yeah.
loud. There's this
Yeah.
what is the point of what I'm doing? And there just is so much more weight than in other fields, I find.
Yeah.
There's like such a louder inner critic there. And I think the inner critic is loud because the work is good. Like, so the louder the critic is because you care more basically about what you're doing.
I
And
love that
so,
perspective.
yeah, so, in many ways it's going to happen, it's going to come, but you also have to see it as, that this is because I'm invested in it. You don't care about
Yeah.
if you're not invested in something, you won't care whether or not it's working out in any way.
Yeah, that's
If you're
true.
invested in it, then your judgment about it is a little bit higher. But you have
Mm.
to be aware that that judgment is exactly that. It is judgment, and it is flawed, and it is you have to take it with a grain of salt. And I guess that would lead me to my last point, which is that some artists lack critical feedback on their work,
Yeah.
and that they're very much in an isolated practice sometimes. Again,
Yeah.
not all, and they don't have regular feedback on their work. And artists
Yeah.
do need that regular feedback on their work, as much as working alone and working in solitude and head down and focused is really useful. Having feedback and other eyes and words on the work, I think, is invaluable.
Love that. I think I can relate to so many. I mean, we've all experienced if we and I think it's not even like you overcome and then they never come back to you. I mean, I feel like it's like a practice that you keep going, okay, you're over it for a time and then when it back hits back on your door and you're like, okay, this is going
That's
somewhere
right.
and then you need to circle back. I have a very important question that I would also ask for myself now, and I'm sure a
Sure.
lot of people, which is like, you know, um, I'm so grateful for social media, for everything, especially in the past couple of years, because it's really expanded. I mean, I feel like it's how you see it. I'm sure I agree there are pros and cons of everything, and there's good and bad to both, but like, being more online or whatever. But
Hmm.
I do appreciate it. I think I've experienced it firsthand with uh, so many advantages of social media. I come from a place where I didn't have access to a lot of you know it's not even artists. I feel like there's so many kind. One art world is full of so many different groups and different kind of art worlds, mini art worlds in their own, and we all just need to navigate where we fit in the best or where we feel belong the best. While I was while the social media time was of course not so main and predominant, I feel like a lot of us couldn't ever have access to things that I where I grew up or where I belong, I did not resonate so much. I had lack of community, I had lack of exposure. I couldn't see the art that I really wanted to see, and I wanted to see the contemporary version of what we had. And I'm so grateful for social media for that. And I even today I say that as my own personal practice, what I do, arts to hearts, at arts to hearts is one very important part of my own practice, and my own creative studio practice is the other half, where with arts to hearts I pursue, I mean every month I meet over 100 artists. I get into their studios, look at works, curate shows, and for me it's like, for me, that is my research, that is how I know what's happening, that's
Hmm.
how I know my visual eyes also get trained. And I feel like
Hmm.
it puts me so much in place. It's like my personal art school, honestly. I always say that it's like I'm putting myself through art school in a format like that, and my own
Hmm.
practice. Now I was able to take this leap of faith, and even I feel like every day I have to trust myself more and more that I can take that step and go forward and go forward. But what about people who don't, mm, who may not necessarily come from the major countries,
Hmm.
bigger cities, and not have access to contacts, exposure, community, and how can, and like I'm sure, like I'm sitting in India and I work with all over the people with all over the world, and very less with people in India actually. A lot of our community is based out of US and Canada, and I honestly, my dream is, I mean, I pursue to be showing my work all around the globe, and I'm sure all of us want that. But how do you make that possible when you come from a place which is, you know, which is smaller, less exposed, in a country, in a state, in a city? How do artists bridge that gap for themselves?
Yes, as in how do they do that research,
Yeah, and
basically?
fine. I think more than research, how do they how do they put themselves more forward in their careers, staying from a place if they don't have, uh, it's easier. If I'm living in New York, it's easier for me to meet the right people. It's easier for me to be more exposed. It's easier for me to have access to a community. But when you're sitting in a smaller town in a in a different part of the world, and you may not have so many exposures, and you're limited to your practice, what would you suggest for artists to, maybe if they want to become internationally renowned, let's
Yeah,
say?
first, I think it's important to do some research into where they want to be or where they want to show. Yes, one might think living in New York, it might be easier, but it's also not, because there's also so much competition and so many
Competition.
other people trying to do that, and a
Yeah,
lot less space to be able to do that. But if you're
yeah,
looking, like, I think you have to define what your goals are, and just leveling up or becoming a famous artist isn't enough. That's not specific enough. I think we need to figure out what it is exactly you want to do. If it is that you want to show in a public gallery, which one? Then looking at those and applying to those. If you want to build community because you are from a small town and you don't feel like those folks in your small town can satisfy that, it is about maybe looking into doing a residency in a different place, a residency that has a number of different artists at it as well, if it's about community. So really, I think
okay,
one of the common complaints about living in a small town or in a remote area is actually that you have to define what it is that you want, and that goal has to be a little bit more specific rather than thinking, oh, I'm from a small town and
yeah,
therefore I have less resources. Well, not really. That's actually not necessarily the case. It is harder to get your work to a specific place if you're
yeah,
if you're trying to get to that place. So yeah, absolutely that part. But I think we need to maybe define. You just need to be a little bit more specific about your
yeah,
goals and figure
I
out what
can,
it is you want to do and what you want to do. And if that's the case, and you want to show in a very specific place or meet very particular types of people, then it's about researching where they are and then physically going there.
yeah. I think you put it very right, because sometimes, even now when I'm applying your suggestion on my own situation, because I remember when I started, I felt like my biggest struggle was community. For as an artist, I knew that the work I was making, I still needed to get, like, I had a way ahead, but it was very hard for me to make that work all by myself. I needed to have conversations that, like like an artist, and I needed a place where I could say the things that I did while making that work, and feel resonated and feel supported, so that I knew that I wasn't alone. Like, I didn't want to think that I was this one spot in the world, and like that window who's, like, we all feel, we want to feel. And I think I was focused on only solving that part of the problem for me. I know I have several down the list, but I knew that to first keep going, I need to have the fuel that lets me keep going. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's such, oh my God, sometimes we don't even realize the things that we do unless, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my last question, which is,
Okay, I have 5 minutes before I have to go. It's just to
oh,
let you know.
okay, we'll quickly
61.
wind this up. Yes,
Sure.
perfect. Okay, so my last question is, um, if an artist who wants to pursue, like, want to opt in to work with artist consultants,
Mm-hmm.
how would that, so a lot of people get curious that how would that work?
Mm-hmm.
I think very common questions that come up with, when do they know if they're ready?
Mm-hmm.
Second, how does that work?
Hmm.
Can you answer these questions and maybe also just a little bit insight on how it works for you?
Sure. Yeah. So you're ready anytime. The biggest, I think, um, misunderstanding is that you have to have a lot of work or be, very much through a project before you sign up for a meeting. It's actually kind of better the other way around, where you are just starting out maybe on a practice, because if you come and you have all these things, and then I or someone else might make a suggestion
Yeah,
that a lot of these things might have been better another way. Well, I think that
that's
you've
a
already
lot
done
of
all
shit.
the work.
Yeah,
Exactly. So basically, uh, there's never a shortage of anything to talk about. Let's put it that way. The other thing is, like, we offer mini consults, which are 30 minutes instead of an hour, and that time really flies by. So that's often, if you don't know that whether or not you know need the full one, or if you have some immediate questions that are just sort of like burning questions about one particular thing, I really recommend just giving one of the mini sessions a try. And then we basically meet you at where you're at. You have to fill out a form ahead of time, and that kind of gives
yeah,
a little bit of insight into your practice. And then, yeah, and then we meet you where you're at. It is, some people like to see it as maintenance, a lot like, going to the dentist, where you
yeah.
just you make sure you go to the dentist
It's
every few months, and that's
it's like a
that, right?
therapist that you need to have for your creative profession, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, we're never going to ask you. You're going to have to decide when it is best for you to come back and have another kind of update or catch up again.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Okay. So, would you like to share if anyone who's interested in working with you, and
Hmm.
where can they find you, and how can they
Sure.
work with you, or if you have anything else that you want to add to it?
Yeah, okay. You can always find us at our website at dazedandconfucius.com, or you can find us on Instagram at dazed.and.confucius. Um, and that's where we post anything that's kind of coming up or happening, like seminars, online or maybe in your city. And otherwise, nothing. I think that's about it. I will be teaching another session with the NYC Crit Club coming
Yeah,
up in the springtime.
I saw
And
that.
so, yeah, take a look at that. And otherwise, anytime anyone's in Vancouver or Victoria, feel free to stop by our offices.
Lovely. Perfect. So, anyone who's listening to this episode, you can find all the links in the show notes. I will be linking Dazed and Confucius website, link to the artist consultations, and the NY Secret Club link, so that you can sign up. And I'm sure that it could be that one step that can, I think we just need to take that one step that gets everything going. So I really appreciate, Pennylane. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're in a hurry, so I will let you go. Thank you
No
so
problem.
much.
You're so,
Thank
so
you.
welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been great to
Truly,
chat.
same here. Truly a pleasure. Thank you.